The Xyrath Collective had ruled the stars for longer than most young civilizations could even measure. Their ships were sleek, precise, and designed to move like blades across the dark ocean of space. To the Xyrath, war was not war, it was procedure. It was calculation. Their fleets expanded outward in waves, never hesitating, never questioning. Wherever they went, resistance fell quickly, almost politely, like paper folding before fire. In their long history of conquest, they had encountered many species, but none that mattered for long. Some were loud, desperate creatures that shouted bravely before being silenced. Others tried to hide in distant moons or quiet stations, but the Xyrath always found them. A few begged for mercy, and the collective absorbed them, reshaping them into something useful. None, however, had ever slowed the advance of their fleets. None had given them reason to pause. That changed when they reached the Sol frontier. The Sol system was unremarkable to the Xyrath. A yellow star, several planets, gas giants, and belts of rock. A system like many they had consumed before. Their attention was not on the star or the planets, but on the species rumored to live there, humans. The first scouts returned strange reports. Humans were a puzzle, too young to be a threat but too stubborn to vanish quietly. They had fought wars among themselves, then built fragile alliances to reach the stars. The collective studied them with the same cool interest it gave all young civilizations. Their conclusion was clear. Humanity would fall as all others had fallen, so the Xyrath sent a fleet. It was not their largest fleet, only enough to sweep away a minor people. Hundreds of ships slid through the dark, their silver hulls glinting faintly in the reflected light of distant suns. They entered the Sol frontier with absolute certainty, their navigators already charting the efficient path toward Earth. But the certainty cracked when they saw it. At first, the object near Neptune seemed like debris, a shadow caught against the great blue planet. Then the shadow moved, not drifting like stone, but turning with intention. Sensors struggled to read it. The data returned was wrong. Size estimates shifted, details blurred. The Xyrath watched as the shape grew clearer. It was a ship, not just any ship. A human warship. The fleet had expected smaller craft, fragile escorts, maybe orbital defenses. What they saw instead defied their logic. The vessel was vast, longer than any ship the Xyrath had built, armored with plates so thick that their scanners could not see past them. Along its sides bristled rows of weapon mounts, some glowing faintly with energy, others silent and cold. Its design was not smooth or elegant. It was heavy, scarred, and strange, as if it had been built not for display but for survival. The warship drifted in silence. It did not move to attack. It did not send a signal. It simply waited. The commanders of the Xyrath fleet opened a channel, broadcasting in clear tones. Identify, surrender, prepare for absorption. These were the words spoken to all new species. There was never an answer, there did not need to be. But this time the silence felt different. The human ship did not reply. Instead it rotated slowly like a giant waking from sleep. A line of scars across its hull caught the starlight. They were not the smooth lines of design, but the marks of battle. The ship had fought before. It had survived. The Xyrath grew uneasy. They were not creatures of emotion, but hesitation rippled through their ranks. The vessel's silence was not weakness. It was something else. Something they did not understand. The lead admiral studied the image on his display. The human ship looked less like a machine and more like a predator, crouched and waiting. Its weapons were old by some measures, yet their sheer number and size made the fleet uneasy. This was not how other civilizations built their ships. Others built for efficiency, for economy. Humans, it seemed, built for war. One commander suggested advancing at once. Overwhelm the ship, strip it apart, prove that the humans were no different than the rest. Another argued for caution. The silence of the vessel, its refusal to move or answer, felt deliberate. It was not broken, it was not afraid, it was watching. And in that moment the fleet did something it had never done before. It stopped moving. The stars around Neptune glittered coldly. The gas giant turned in its slow orbit, its storms swirling in endless silence. And between those storms and the watching stars, the human warship waited. The Xyrath, for the first time in centuries, did not advance. They studied the ship, scanning again and again. Yet the more they studied, the less they understood. Energy signatures were inconsistent, as though the vessel carried more power than its size should allow. Some weapons looked primitive, firing metal projectiles instead of energy beams. Others pulsed with energy far beyond known limits. The combination made no sense, and that made it worse. For the Xyrath, war was always predictable. But here before them was something that defied prediction. The Admiral considered history. Had the humans built only one such warship? Or were there more, hidden deeper in the system? The scars on its hull told a story of battles fought far from Sol. Against who? Against what? The silence pressed in on them. Every second the human ship remained still. The unease of the fleet grew. They had never feared before, but now they hesitated. It was the first crack in the collective's perfect certainty. And though no human voice spoke, no weapon fired and no engines roared, the Xyrath knew something had changed. They were no longer the only watchers in the dark. They had looked upon a human warship for the first time, and they stopped moving. The Xyrath fleet hung in silence, their silver ships glittering faintly in the darkness near Neptune. Never before had they hesitated in the face of conquest. Never before had they paused their steady advance into another system. But now, for the first time in centuries, their rhythm was broken. The human warship drifted before them like a giant shadow, its surface scarred, its weapons silent but visible. It gave no signal, no greeting, no threat. To the Xyrath, the silence was worse than any weapon fire. Inside the flagship of the fleet, Admiral Kirik stood before the great viewing wall. His narrow eyes studied the warship carefully. It was massive, larger than their largest carriers, heavier than their troop transports, armed with more weapons than seemed possible for one ship. Its design made no sense. There was no elegance, no symmetry, no efficiency. It was brutal, layered with armor upon armor, with thick cannons that pointed outward like teeth. To the Xyrath, design was always clean. Ships were smooth, polished, shaped with balance and order. Yet this human vessel was full of edges, scars, and strange modifications. It looked less like something designed in a laboratory, and more like something built in a forge during war. "Report," Kirik said calmly. His voice, like all Xyrath leaders, carried no emotion, only command. "Scanners cannot confirm full dimensions," one of his officers replied. "Energy readings fluctuate. At times the vessel appears dormant. At other times, spikes suggest power levels far beyond expected limits." Another officer spoke. "Weapon mounts are numerous, too many to calculate exact number. Types are mixed. Some fire directed energy, others appear to launch solid projectiles. This is illogical. Primitive and advanced combined in one design." The Admiral remained silent. His eyes followed the scars on the ship's hull. Those were not decorations. They were wounds. The vessel had fought. The vessel had survived. "Why does it not answer?" another commander asked. "Perhaps damaged," one suggested. "No," the Admiral replied at once. "It is not damaged. It is waiting." A quiet unease filled the control chamber. The Xyrath were not creatures of fear, but they were creatures of logic, and logic told them that something was wrong. The Admiral turned his gaze to the officers. "Prepare to test its response." Moments later, one of the smaller Xyrath scout ships broke formation. Its engines glowed as it moved carefully toward the human warship. The rest of the fleet watched, their sensors focused on the shadow. The scout drew closer. Its scanners swept across the human ship, searching for weaknesses, mapping the structure. For a long moment there was no response. The warship did not move. It did not fire. Then suddenly the scout's instruments went dark. The pilot shouted across the comms. "Systems failing!" "Power drain!" His words cut off. The entire scout ship flickered on the fleet's display. Then in an instant its engines shut down, its lights dimmed, and the vessel drifted lifelessly. Gasps filled the command chamber. "What happened?" the Admiral demanded. "No attack detected," the officers replied. "No energy beams, no projectiles. The ship simply lost power." Kyrix narrowed his eyes. The scout was gone, paralyzed, lifeless. Yet the human warship had not moved. It was as if the ship had reached out unseen and plucked the scout's life away without effort. The silence deepened. The fleet shifted uneasily. The Admiral spoke again. "Hold position. Do not advance." His words were unusual. The collective had never feared advancing before. But the warship before them was different. It was not like the others they had conquered. It was something else. Hours passed. The warship remained still. like a sentinel guarding the outer reaches of the system. The Zirath tried again and again to scan it, to break through its mystery, but each attempt returned confusion. Some scans suggested the warship was ancient, older than human civilization itself. Others suggested it was new, with energy patterns too recent to calculate. It was as though the ship was cloaked in deception, showing only what it wanted them to see. The officers whispered among themselves, "Why build such a ship? Humans are young. They should not have this knowledge. Perhaps it is their only ship of this kind. A final defense? Perhaps it is a relic not of their making." The admiral listened but said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the warship. He felt the truth even if he could not explain it. This vessel was not a relic. It was human. It carried their mark. The scars, the weapons, the mixture of designs, all of it spoke of a species that fought, adapted, survived. Finally, one of the younger officers asked the question none wished to speak. "Admiral, do we retreat?" The chamber went silent. Retreat was not a word the collective used. They expanded. They absorbed. They never turned back. To retreat was to admit weakness, but the word hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The admiral did not answer immediately. He looked once more at the warship. Its weapons gleamed faintly in the reflected starlight. Its hull bore the marks of wars already fought. Its silence was louder than thunder. "Not yet," Kirix finally said. "We will watch. We will learn." And so the fleet remained. The warship drifted, but it was not idle. The Zirath noticed small details. Lights across its hull glowed and dimmed. Antennas shifted slightly as though listening to the stars. Heat readings rose and fell in ways too controlled to be random. The warship was alive, patient, aware. The admiral began to feel a strange thought forming, a thought alien to his kind. Perhaps the humans had built this ship not only to fight, but to be seen. To be a message. To declare something without words, and the message was clear. We are not weak. The fleet remained motionless for hours more. Each ship felt the weight of the silence pressing down. The younger officers grew restless, their hands tightening at their controls. But none dared to break formation, because deep in their logic, one truth was becoming clear. This warship was not waiting for them to act. It was deciding what to do with them. On the distant planet of Earth, humans watched as well. Hidden stations and quiet relays sent streams of data to command centers buried deep beneath oceans and mountains. The warship was not alone. It was the forward guardian of a network, part of a defense older than outsiders knew. The humans did not speak to the invaders. They did not hail them. They did not explain, for they knew what the Zirath had just begun to learn. Sometimes silence was stronger than fire. Sometimes the sight of a single warship was enough to stop a fleet. And so, the standoff continued. The Zirath had come expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had found a shadow that would not move, a silence that would not break. It was their first true glimpse of human power, and already, some of them began to wonder if their empire had reached too far. They had come to watch humans fall, but instead, they found themselves watched, and the watching made them still. The Zirath fleet remained frozen near Neptune, their ships forming a wide arc around the human warship. Hours had turned to days, yet the standoff held. Neither side fired. Neither side retreated. In the vast silence of space, even time seemed to slow. For the Zirath, this was unnatural. Their fleets were designed for constant movement, like blades cutting through water. Hesitation was foreign to them, delay unthinkable. But in the presence of the human vessel, movement felt dangerous, almost forbidden. Admiral Kirix stood tall in the flagship's command hall, his eyes never leaving the image of the warship on the central screen. Its shape filled the display, a mountain of metal drifting calmly in the void. It had not changed position in days, yet every officer in the fleet felt its weight pressing against them. Reports filled the air, steady but uncertain. Scans incomplete, hull density unknown. Energy readings remain inconsistent, at times near zero, at other times spiking far above calculation. Communications remain unanswered. The admiral listened in silence. He knew the truth hidden between the lines. Their best technology, their sharpest minds could not understand the ship. It was as if the vessel itself chose what to reveal. For the first time in centuries, the Zirath admitted to themselves, they did not know. On the second day, another test was ordered. This time, a destroyer moved forward, Not a scout, but a warship of its own. Its weapons were armed, but it did not fire. It only approached slowly, carefully as the rest of the fleet watched. The human ship did not move. The destroyer edged closer, scanning with stronger beams. For a moment it seemed as if nothing would happen. Perhaps the warship truly was nothing more than a relic, a shell meant to frighten. Then the lights across the destroyer's hull flickered. Engines sputtered. Weapon systems went offline. One by one its systems shut down until the entire vessel went dark. Gasps filled the command chambers across the fleet. "Report," the admiral demanded. "No sign of attack," the officers replied, panic seeping into their usually calm tones. No weapons fired. No projectiles. Systems simply failed. On the screens, the destroyer drifted helplessly, joining the scout ship that had been silenced before. The human warship had still not moved. Whispers began to spread among the fleet. Officers spoke quietly, voices low as though afraid the human vessel could hear them. "It disables us without firing. It drains energy, perhaps. Or it bends space. Impossible. Yet it happens." Admiral Kirix listened to the whispers, though he gave no sign. His mind worked carefully, piecing together fragments of logic. If the human ship could disable their craft at will, why had it not done so to the entire fleet? Why only the ships that approached? A realization struck him. "It is sending a message," he said aloud. The officers turned to him uncertain. "It has the power to strike us all, yet it has not. It chooses only those who move too close. It is drawing a line, a boundary. It tells us come no nearer." The officers fell silent. None argued, for in their minds the logic was undeniable. As the days stretched on, the standoff became heavier. The fleet did not move forward. The human warship did not advance. It was a contest of patience, a battle without weapons. But within the stillness, something began to change. The younger Xyrath officers, those born long after the last great war of the Collective, began to feel something their kind did not speak of: doubt. They had always believed in their empire's certainty. Expansion was destiny. Resistance was foolish. Every species before had fallen quickly, their defenses meaningless against the precision of the Collective. But here, against a single silent warship, their fleet had stopped. One officer whispered to another, "If this is only one ship, how many more do they hide?" Another replied, "If this is only their watchman, what stands behind it?" Such questions had no answers, but once spoken, they did not fade. They grew, spreading like cracks through the perfect stone of the Collective's logic. On the fourth day, the admiral called a council of commanders. They gathered in a wide chamber aboard the flagship, their figures tall and still, their voices calm but tense. The hologram of the human warship hovered in the center, its scarred hull and countless weapons displayed for all to see. "We cannot remain here forever," one commander said. "Our fleets grow restless. Our supplies dwindle. Action must be taken." "Then we strike," another declared. "Overwhelm it with numbers. One ship cannot stand against hundreds." "Numbers mean nothing if they cannot fire," a third replied sharply. "It disabled 2 ships without effort. What if it disables the rest?" Murmurs rose around the chamber. The logic was harsh. If the warship truly held such power, even overwhelming numbers would fail. Finally, Admiral Kirix raised his hand and silence fell. "You all see what I see," he said. "This vessel is not built as others are. It is not meant to be efficient. It is meant to endure. It carries the mark of battles long past. It waits because it can afford to wait." The commanders listened. Some frowned, others remained still, but none interrupted. Kirix continued, his voice steady. "The humans have built a weapon not just of metal but of fear. It does not fire because it does not need to. It makes us stop. And that alone is victory." The chamber grew cold with silence. His words struck them deeply, for they knew he spoke the truth. Outside in the endless dark, the human warship remained unmoving. Yet it felt alive, like a great beast sleeping with one eye open. The Xyrath fleet dared not draw closer. They dared not retreat either, for retreat would be shame. So they lingered, trapped in a silence heavier than battle. Each officer, each soldier aboard the fleet felt the same thought pressing against their minds. The humans are not as we believed. They are not weak. They are not unprepared. And if this is what they show us openly, what do they keep hidden? For the first time in centuries, the Xyrath felt the shadow of something greater than themselves, and still the warship did not move. The Xyrath fleet still lingered in the shadow of Neptune. Days had stretched into a week, yet the great human warship had not moved, not spoken, not fired a single shot. Its silence was a weight pressing down upon every Xyrath vessel. For the collective, silence was never strength. They valued clear commands, swift logic, and efficient decisions. Yet this warship had turned silence into a weapon. It said nothing, and still the most powerful fleet sent into Sol did not advance. Admiral Keurig stood in his command chamber, his eyes fixed on the looming shape of the vessel. Its hull scars reflected faint light, each mark telling a story he could not read. He had tried to reason with the ship's behavior, to explain it with calculation, but logic failed him. The ship should have been weak, for humans were young, yet this vessel showed strength that did not match their history. And when logic fails, memory begins to stir. One of the older science officers approached the admiral. His voice was quiet, though not out of fear, but out of thought. "There are records," he said, "from our deep-range probes long ago. Reports from the edges of mapped space. Some thought them errors, some thought them myths. But I recall," the admiral turned. "Speak." The officer gestured, and old holographic images appeared. Fragments of blurred recordings. Shadows of battles far from Sol. Ships exploding, moons scarred. Entire fleets vanishing in fire. "Our probes witnessed wars," the officer explained. "Wars fought not by us, but by others. Unknown fleets, unknown enemies. And in those wars there were shapes. Shapes like this one." The chamber fell silent. "You suggest the humans have fought before?" Keurig asked slowly. "Yes," the officer replied. "Perhaps long before we noticed them. Perhaps against enemies we do not know. These scars are not decoration. They are memory." The admiral looked back at the human warship, his mind heavy. If this was true, then humanity was not untested. They had already bled in wars greater than the Xyrath had imagined, and that meant they were not merely defending Sul. They were warning. Meanwhile, whispers moved through the fleet like a slow current. Young officers, unused to waiting, began to speak quietly among themselves. What if this is not their only ship? What if they have fleets hidden deeper in the system? What if they are waiting for us to strike first so they can unleash their full strength? These whispers grew, carried from ship to ship. Fear was not something the Xyrath admitted, but doubt was something they could not hide. And doubt, once planted, grew like a shadow across their perfect logic. On the 8th day, the Fleet Council gathered again. Holograms of commanders flickered in a wide circle, each speaking in turn. "We cannot remain here forever," one insisted. "Our supplies decline. Our soldiers grow restless. We must act." "To retreat is shame," another argued. "The collective has never turned away from conquest. If we retreat, we show weakness to all. But to advance may be death," a third countered sharply. "This one ship has already disabled 2 of ours without firing. If it can do that, imagine what happens when we move together." The debate raged, voices calm but sharp. Each commander sought reason, yet no reason came. Every argument bent back toward the same truth. The warship had stopped them. Admiral Keurig listened, silent until the voices faded. At last he spoke. "You argue over pride and shame, but you forget the lesson before us. This ship does not seek to fight us, it only waits. It shows us what it has done before. It tells us what it could do again." He gestured toward the warship's hologram. "This is no accident. This is history speaking, and we are the students." The chamber grew quiet. None could deny his words. As the days continued, the admiral studied the ship more closely. He ordered detailed scans not just of the vessel itself, but of the patterns it showed, its energy cycles, its silence, its slow movements. He began to notice something strange every few hours. Small pulses of energy moved across the ship's hull. They were not random. They were patterns, signals, almost like a heartbeat. The admiral realized then that the warship was not only alive, it was awake. It was watching them as closely as they watched it. The thought chilled him. On Earth, humans continued their quiet observation. The warship was their chosen messenger. They knew the Xyrath fleet lingered, but they did not speak. They did not explain. Some in human command centers argued for sending a message. "We should tell them to leave. Warn them in words," but the leaders shook their heads. "No, let the warship speak. Its silence is stronger than any warning." And so they remained quiet. By the 10th day, the weight upon the Xyrath was unbearable. Ships reported increased unrest among crews. Officers snapped at one another in frustration. The fleet had not fought, had not moved, and in that stillness their strength felt wasted. At last, one commander broke. "We must strike," he declared. "If we remain, we rot. If we retreat, we shame ourselves. Attack is the only choice." The admiral did not answer. He looked again at the human warship. Its weapons glimmered faintly, unmoved, patient. He thought of the officer's words, of old probe records of battles long past. He thought of the disabled scout and destroyer, floating lifeless as warnings. He thought of the silence, heavy and deliberate, and deep within him a truth formed. The collective had never faced an enemy like this before, not because the humans were older, not because they were stronger, but because they had endured, and endurance was the greatest strength of all. That night cycle, the admiral stood alone in the viewing chamber. He looked out across the stars, across the vast silence. The human warship waited, scars glowing faintly like old wounds in the starlight. He thought of the long history of the collective, of centuries of conquest, of endless victories. He thought of how easily other species had fallen, how quickly they had surrendered. And then he thought of humans, a younger species, a stubborn species, a species that had already carved scars into their ships and carried them proudly into battle. For the first time, the admiral understood. This was not the end of their story. This was the beginning, and the collective would need to decide if it wished to be part of that story or to be broken by it. The next morning cycle, the admiral gathered his commanders. His voice was calm, his decision firm. "We will not attack." Shock rippled through the chamber. Some commanders argued at once. "Retreat is shame." But Kirix raised a hand. "Retreat is wisdom. The humans are not prey. They are something else. If we strike now, we lose more than ships. We lose our future." Silence followed. His words were heavy, but they carried truth. The commanders knew it. And so, for the first time in centuries, a Xyrath fleet prepared not for conquest, but for retreat. Still, before they turned, the admiral looked one last time at the human warship. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture rare among his kind. "You have shown us history," he whispered softly. Words not meant for his officers, but for the silent vessel. "And we have listened." The warship did not reply. It only waited, scars glowing in the light of the distant sun. And as the Xyrath fleet turned away, leaving Saul behind, the admiral knew one truth above all. This was not the end of their meeting with humanity. It was only the beginning. The Xyrath fleet began to move, but not forward. For the first time in centuries, the great silver ships turned their engines away from conquest and set their course toward retreat. The silence in space did not change. The human warship still drifted near Neptune, its scars shining faintly in the reflected light of the sun. It did not chase them. It did not fire, it only watched. For the Xyrath, this retreat was heavier than any defeat. They had not fired a single shot. They had not lost a battle, yet they carried the weight of loss with them. The weight was not from broken ships or fallen soldiers, but from something far greater, the shattering of certainty. The collective had always believed that nothing could resist them. Now they had seen something that did not resist, something that simply existed and in its existence made them stop. Inside the flagship, Admiral Kirix remained silent as his officers carried out the retreat. None dared to speak of shame. None dared to speak of victory. Words felt useless. The admiral's eyes never left the display of the human warship as it grew smaller behind them. It was not pursuit that troubled him. It was the stillness. He had seen predators before, but predators always moved, always struck. This was different. This ship was not a predator. It was a guardian. It had drawn a line in the stars, and the collective had not crossed it. Days passed as the fleet pulled away from the Sol frontier. But even as the distance grew, the image of the warship remained in their minds. Its silence had spoken more than 1,000 warnings. Whispers filled the ships. Officers spoke of the scars on its hull, of the power that had silenced their scouts and destroyer, of the possibility that more such vessels waited unseen. Some believed the humans had fleets hidden across the system. Others believed they had only this one ship, but that it was enough. What all agreed upon was this: they had never faced such a foe before. In the command chamber, the admiral called his senior officers. They gathered, their faces calm but their thoughts restless. "We must record this," Kirik said. His voice was steady but heavier than before. "The collective must know. The leaders must see what we have seen." One officer asked, "What shall we tell them? That we turned away from a single ship?" The admiral's eyes narrowed. "We will tell them truth. That this ship was not a single vessel but a message. That humanity is not prey to be consumed. That they have endured wars before and they will endure wars again." The officers listened, some nodding slowly, others silent. None argued, for deep within them they felt the same truth. Back in Sol, the human warship did not move. It had no need to chase the retreating fleet. Its duty was not to hunt but to guard. On Earth, command centers lit with quiet celebration. The invasion fleet had turned back without a battle. The warship had done its task without firing a single weapon, but the human leaders were not careless. They knew the Zerath would remember. They knew the collective would return one day, stronger, more cautious, more determined, and so they prepared. More warships were built. More defenses were hidden across moons, asteroids, and stations. The humans did not speak of peace. They spoke of readiness, for they understood what the Zerath had now begun to learn. The galaxy respects strength, and survival is strength. In the deep reaches of space, the Zerath fleet slowed as it approached the central territories of the collective. Messages had already been sent ahead, carrying reports of the encounter. The leaders of the Empire awaited answers. In the High Council chamber, the hologram of Admiral Kirik appeared. Around him sat the most powerful voices of the collective. They questioned him sharply. "Why did you not attack? Why did you retreat? Why do you bring back silence instead of conquest?" The Admiral listened calmly. Then he spoke. "We faced something beyond numbers. We faced history. The human warship was not simply a machine. It was a warning. It carried scars of battles we do not understand. It silenced our ships without effort. It held our fleet in place with silence alone. If we had attacked, we would not have returned." The council shifted uneasily. Some argued still. "They are young. They are weak." "You exaggerate," but Kirik raised his hand. "No, they are young, yes, but they are not weak. They are stronger than most because they have already learned the one truth of survival: to endure. We must not mistake youth for weakness. If we do, we will fall." His words struck the chamber. For the collective, this was new thinking. They had always measured strength by technology, by numbers, by efficiency, but the Admiral had spoken of something else: endurance, scars, survival. And in their hearts, even the proud counselors knew, scars were proof of battles won. The report of the Sol encounter spread across the collective. Soldiers, officers, even common citizens whispered of the human warship. Some laughed and dismissed it. Others wondered quietly, their certainty shaken. But all knew the truth. An invasion had been stopped without a shot, and that truth would not fade. Meanwhile, in Sol, the humans continued their work. The warship returned slowly from its post near Neptune, docking with hidden stations for repair and resupply. Its scars were studied, its systems checked, its silence praised. The crew of the ship did not feel pride in victory, for they had not fired a weapon. They felt something deeper. They had been the first to stand before the collective and hold them still. They had been the wall on which an empire stopped, and though the galaxy might not yet know it, history had turned. Admiral Kirik, now returned to the heart of the collective, stood alone in his chamber. He looked out across the stars, his mind heavy with thoughts. He saw the human warship in every memory, drifting, silent, unmoving. He whispered to himself, "They will come again, and when they do, we must be ready." But even now, I wonder, will readiness be enough? For he knew the truth that many in the collective still refused to admit. The humans had not shown all their strength. They had shown only what was needed, and that was enough to stop an empire. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, the story began to spread. Travelers spoke of a fleet halted in silence. Traders whispered of humans who built warships that carried scars like badges of honor. Rumors grew, shaped by fear and wonder. The story changed with each telling, but the heart remained. The collective had met humans. They had seen a warship, and they had stopped moving. On Earth, as night covered the cities, a simple phrase was spoken quietly among the people. They saw us, and they stopped. It was not pride. It was not arrogance. It was a reminder. Humanity knew the galaxy would not leave them alone. But they also knew something greater. They had faced the first wave and they had endured. And in endurance there was hope. The story did not end with victory. The story ended with silence. A silence that carried across stars. A silence that spoke louder than war. A silence that told the galaxy humanity endures.